So today we're going to be discussing the VA, and that is why we've chosen Michelle to be on. Michelle is a state specialist extraordinaire. She has a lot of experience with helping families with VA matters, and she is our resident go-to person. So I'm going to navigating the VA is not easy. It's super confusing. There's a lot of ins and outs. There's a lot of forms that are confusing, and there's a lot of misunderstandings actually about what the services actually are, especially when it comes to burial. So we'll just be going through those. I'm going to start our slides here. So today, what families need to know, VA edition. Veterans Affairs Administration, that's what the VA stands for. So the United States has a long and deep history of having one of the most comprehensive systems for veterans in the entire world. But a lot of families don't understand those benefits, and they don't understand the type of recognition that can be given a veteran at the time of the passing as well. So a lot of families have questions. So we're going to start here. We're going to go through some of those frequently asked questions and find out how we help the families with those things, and then be able to hear some of the answers so that you all have the information to be able to give the people that you are helping daily. So how do we notify the VA of a passing?
So, when we have a veteran who has passed, we talk to the family. And first of all, we discuss the honors that are available with the family, such as receiving a flag. Having that flag ceremony at a funeral is just a beautiful service. And so often the funeral home has talked to the family about that. But if not, we do let them know that they can apply to receive a flag, as well as a grave marker and a presidential certificate of gratitude. This is issued by the sitting president, and it's a beautiful certificate. The family can request multiple copies. Now, beyond that, we ask the family, was the veteran receiving a monthly payment from the VA? And sometimes they know instantly what we're talking about. Perhaps the veteran had a disability through the service that he had with the military. And it's really important to contact the VA regarding a disability. If there's a surviving spouse, that spouse may be entitled to DIC. Ongoing payments, they may already be receiving some things, but we do contact the VA regarding the loss of the veteran. Uh,
Absolutely. And it is my experience that a lot of families, they're super concerned about how that last payment is going to be paid, or if it will be paid, if it will be taken back. They want to look into eligible spousal benefits, or for dependent children or disabled adult children. And I think one of the biggest things is to understand the reimbursement for funeral expense that is offered through the VA.
yes. And with that notification, the funeral or the VA, excuse me, will send out the forms for funeral reimbursement. There's also a survivor's pension that can be applied for. Now, VA forms can be a little bit intimidating. And so it's important to know that VA representatives are happy to assist families in answering any questions that they may have about filling out forms. Families can also reach out to a local veterans representative, such as the VFW. They are very familiar with all the different programs that the VA provides, and they can be an excellent resource for families in applying for these benefits. Also, as a state
Absolutely.
specialist, we do try to help the families with the forms as needed.
Yes. And so part of our goal is to make sure that when the report of the passing for the veteran is that we help them avoid any issues with a payment that may be taken out and then reissued to a spouse. We don't want to have them in debt to the VA. That's very, very frustrating and stressful for our family members. But we also have to help them remember, or remind them, or even educate them that they pay in arrears. So how do you explain that to families, Michelle?
This is common with Social Security as well. And so generally, that means that the payment that is issued in the month of passing would be the final payment because it was actually qualified for in the previous month. That's what paying arrears means. And so a timely notification on any death notification is important, as you mentioned, so that payments are not accumulating that will then have to be returned and recouped by the entity. So a timely notification is key.
Absolutely. And a lot of families also have questions about, do they get a partial payment?
So with partial payments, the VA would let you know if that would apply. And that's where it's important to, ask the right questions when notifying the VA. So as an estate specialist, we always find out for the family, what is the final payment? Is there a partial amount, or will there be a month of passing payment that is issued? And then after that, everything would be taken back as they instruct. So that's something that I always follow up on with the VA.
Yeah, and the VA is actually a little bit different than Social Security. So in Social Security, someone has to live an entire month, the entire month. If they die 5 minutes before the next month, they don't receive that month payment. But the VA will do some different calculations than Social Security, correct?
More of a prorated situation.
Yeah, which is confusing when one entity in the government handles it one way and another handles it a different way.
It
R
does get
it's
confusing for the
Yes,
families, absolutely.
absolutely, and then the widows who need to receive benefits, that doesn't happen automatically.
No, and sometimes families get confused because they find that the funeral home will make the notification to Social Security and mistakenly think that they're going to take care of all the notifications. And so I've often talked to families where they thought the VA had been notified, but that was not the case. And so that's why we have the checklist that goes point by point so that we can be sure that everything is addressed. And so we always notify on the VA. Sometimes families have Veterans Aid in Attendance. This is a program that can extend to a veteran and to the spouse, a surviving spouse. I talked to a family that the individual needed ongoing care, was unable to care for them, their daily needs. And the husband had served during a time of war. And so the family was able to contact the VA and fill out the forms to apply for Veterans Aid in Attendance. And I can tell you, this is a substantial benefit that was received for that individual. And so it's really important to be aware of the different programs. And with the VA, you have to apply, and then you will know if you're eligible.
And sometimes they can be pretty slow on making things happen, but
True.
so how do families know if they qualify for a survivor pension? What are the basic guidelines that we go over?
Sir, for a survivor pension, at least one of these must be true. And the veteran entered active duty on or before September 7th, 1980, and served at least 90 days on active military service, with at least 1 day during a covered wartime period. Or the veteran entered active duty on September 7th, 1980, and served at least 24 months or the full period for which they were called or ordered to active duty, with some exceptions, with at least 1 day during a covered wartime period. Or the veteran was an officer and started on active duty after October 16th, 1981, and hadn't previously served on active duty for at least 24 months. Now, it's hard to remember all of that and
I was just gonna
process it.
say.
And so, what you need to know is that the VA's website is very good. I go to it all the time to verify information. And so, just be aware that there's an awful lot of information on there for veterans and for veterans' families.
And this is why it's so important when families hear all of that, all they hear is, you know what I mean? It
Mhm.
doesn't really, they
It's
need
true.
someone to help them and walk them through. And we're great at explaining things, but really, even we want to get the Veterans Administration on the phone so that they can
Right.
verify all of those tiny little details.
True.
So,
Good
yeah,
point. And there's many programs. For example, I've worked with families who have the PACT Act. This was put in place for veterans who were negatively impacted by the burn pits during Iraq and Afghanistan. These are things to look into. And I know that families do look for professional help with applying for those things. There can be individual companies in your area that specialize in helping families apply for veterans aid and attendance. Check with the local VFW. They have a lot of resources. Also, I found that sometimes the assisted living centers know about these services because these programs can help with the care of a loved one, and so they can provide the family with some additional insights on this and referrals to professional help with these things.
Absolutely. So when we have, sorry, it looks like we lost our slides. So I will see if my guy Aaron in the background can get those going for us again, but we'll just keep going anyway. So if we have a surviving spouse, say on the phone, we know he was a veteran. What does it look like? Like, what is, we call the VA, we make sure,
Yes, we bring
yeah.
them up with the spouse on the line, and they will question the spouse on the different points that they need to know, and a packet of information will be sent out to that individual. Some people don't use email, so they can mail it out. So they would talk through these things with the surviving spouse or family representative so that they're sure that they get the packet of information that is needed.
Yes, and it's very important to get that packet in. I mean, they'll do it pretty quickly if you have email. You'll get it within minutes of being on the phone with them. A lot of times somebody at the funeral home will help with this, with some of the forms there, especially if they're arranging a burial. But we always call the VA with the sort of the eligible spouse on the phone so that we can work through the process of what the next steps are. And that's not just for us, that's for the surviving spouse's benefit as well, so that they
That's right.
understand exactly what
Now,
the process is.
one other point on this that's really important to know is that with that process, they put in an intent to file. Now, what does that mean? That means that when the intent to file is received, that is the date that starts the clock. And so if it takes, time for the family to gather all the paperwork, fill it all out and submit it, once the benefit goes in place, it starts at that date rather than 6 months down the road when they were finally able to complete everything. So the intent to file is an important component for VA benefits.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So another, I'm looking through my slides here. Sorry about that. I'm a little off balance today. Let me go back to the previous slide here. So we get them on the phone. They're sent the paperwork, they're all that. What happens if they don't have the correct documentation? So there's something called a DD 214 that is super, super important. They have to have that to be able to get all of their things in order. So have you run into any issues with that with families?
That is correct. Through the years, sometimes the important documentation is misplaced. The family's searching, they can't find the veterans DD 214. We include a link in our email with the aftercare service so that the family can make contact to receive that DD 214. You cannot do anything without that through the VA. You've got to have that information.
Exactly. So the biggest point where that in I'm going to skip it ahead to slide 6 here. The biggest point where that matters is the burial benefits. So if they want to be buried in a national cemetery, they're kind of on a ticking time frame. And if they don't have their proper paperwork, that can impact what day they have the burial. They can impact the funeral services, all sorts of things. So it really stresses families out. Have you
It's so
experienced that?
true.
Yeah.
Absolutely, it is, and I know funeral homes, they're great at jumping in and really helping the family, and through the aftercare, we also assist with this, and I just wanted to mention that families can look at pre-need planning with the VA. If a loved one is going on hospice who is a veteran, they can actually address these things in advance so that they're not scrambling when the time comes. And that can just provide an immense amount of peace for their loved one to have, the VA lined up ready to go with
Yes.
these things.
And I have had personal experience where we have a surviving family member on the phone and we ask if they have a pre-need plan in place, and they say, "Oh, I don't need one. I'm a veteran," and they take care of everything. So,
Right,
what do you
right,
tell families when they
right.
have that misconception?
Right, absolutely. Well, it may be that they did put a veterans pre-need plan in place. There you can do that by calling the VA and setting these things up so that you have everything lined up. But we talk through it to be sure. Just to clarify, let me understand. Are you saying that you've done pre-need planning with the VA on the final burial arrangements? If not, then that's where we can jump in and help.
Absolutely. We A good example of that happening is a few years ago, we helped a family where that's what they said is, I don't need anything in place. I don't need a pre-need because I have my VA benefits." And we were able to give that feedback to the funeral home who partnered with us, and they informed them about the difference between actual pre-need and what the veterans covers, which there's a gap, there's still expenses in burial. And then they ended up selling 6 pre-need plans to family members who were all veterans
Wow.
who
Yeah.
realized there was a gap there.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
So, in the burial benefits, what other benefits are there?
So there's a medallion, there's a grave marker, the flag, the presidential certificate. These are all things to look into. Some veterans opt for cremation, and so the needs vary depending on their loved one's wishes. And so depending on what they're needing, I would send the appropriate information.
Yes, excellent. I think I'm remembering that there's actually different types of headstone or a marker
Mhm.
or a
That's right.
medallion. What is that?
Right. So the grave marker and the headstone would be for a burial. The medallion, I believe that those can be used with their urns. So these are things to think through. And often, like I said, the funeral homes will discuss those things with the family and have already done so by the time they get to me. But if not, then we definitely make them aware of these things.
Yes. Yeah. And I too have been to graveside services where honors are given and a flag is given to the
Mm,
family, and it is so incredibly touching. Like,
very
it's
moving. Yeah.
yes, it's very, very moving. So if they are receiving benefits through either disability or they retired to the military, how do we handle the notification for retirement, which affects their health care? How do you usually go about that with families?
So with TRICARE is actually notified by Social Security. It trickles down to the VA. So as far as TRICARE goes, they don't need a specific notification. But when there's a surviving spouse, I generally talk to them about, just making sure that things are in place for that individual moving forward. They should see that their benefits are in place and not affected if they had that included in the retirement that they were receiving. And so with with the military retirement, that is often the case where TRICARE will now apply to the spouse moving forward. And so, but it's just good for them to verify that these things are in place.
Absolutely. And then you mentioned the aid and assistance earlier.
Yes.
That is actually something that's available to families who retired to the military, but also anyone who was disabled through the military, right?
So the aid in attendance, they must have served during a time of war
Got it.
and on active duty. And so with attendance, they have some criteria, and there can be asset criteria as far as how much money can be in the bank account. And then, for example, if the surviving spouse, let's say that they lose their vision and so they cannot cook or care for themselves, the daily tasks, that would be a criteria that would qualify them for veterans aid in attendance and a monthly
Absolutely.
payment. So yes, these are big, we're talking big benefits here for the family to help with that care. Very important topic. And
Absolutely.
so if I feel like a family may qualify, I always mention it to them. It's something that even if it doesn't apply today, it may apply down the road. So it's good to know about these programs.
Absolutely. And I'm going to interrupt for a minute and say Matt has messaged in a message on our live, and he says, Michelle is a rock star.
Oh,
Every military family should have an expert like Michelle helping them. And
okay.
I agree 100% with you, Matt.
Well, I've had several family members serve in the military. I've had several family members benefit from these things that we're discussing. And so I am passionate about the VA and passionate about informing the families. I had a family recently that I talked to, and the veteran was still living, and he had injuries that were ongoing from his military service, but had never applied for disability, and it was his doctor who finally said to him, "You know, you should really look to see if you'd qualify for a military disability." And he did. And you know, it was late in life, late in the game, but it was simply because it hadn't occurred to him to look at these benefits. And sometimes the veterans, they just need a family member to ask some questions, say, "Hey, do you think, you'd be interested in looking into these things?" So,
Yes, I think it's especially difficult for our aging family members to speak up. You know, they're in a role of responsibility and mentorship over all of the family that they have around them, and it's hard for them to say, "I need help."
yes.
And it's important, and we are aware of this through our process, that sometimes pushing a little bit and helping them understand and realize that there is help and that it's okay to accept
Right.
help is a huge part of it. Yeah.
Oh, that's an excellent point, Nikki. And family advocacy as a senior ages and their needs become greater, we cannot underestimate the importance of having a family advocate for health care, for insurance, for all the things.
All
It's
of
so
the things.
important. Mhm.
Yes, all the things, and that's a lot of what we do at Full Circle is we're gonna ask them all the questions, we're gonna make sure that we're covering all the bases, we're gonna make sure we're notifying all the things on this slide. There are specific life insurances that are available to some veterans, and so we're gonna
That's
ask
right.
about things like that. And you mentioned a good option to discuss the burial benefits before passing so that the family understands what's available. And we at Full Circle, we can help them file a lot of those claims through the VA. So,
Yep. Excellent.
yeah. So, support for beneficiaries. There is a lot of advice they can get from calling the VA. There's also the local volunteers that help veterans. There's financial advisors that can help with the beneficiaries and how to move things forward. There's actually a lot of resources. What type of resources do you see families usually wanting or needing?
Right. So the Veterans Affairs, they have legal resources for their families that, we always talk about. And so it's just really good to understand this umbrella of coverage that the veteran has and the veterans' families. At Full Circle Aftercare, we also provide professional referrals for our families for free consultations for things such as legal services, financial advisor appointments to talk through any questions they may have. And so we're serving as a backup to the VA on these kind of issues, but oftentimes the families do have the resources directly through the VA.
Yeah, which is amazing. And a lot of families are aware that they're there, but we do have a good chunk of families that really aren't aware of what resources are actually available.